Namaskar, welcome to Prakash on Basics. I am Prakash Zog. We are on the last one or two lectures related to Buddhism, and we are going to talk of a major issue, which is the Buddhist Sangh. The Buddhist Sangh is a major cornerstone of Buddhism. The reason is obvious. Buddha, as a prince, as I told you, was a good administrator and realized that he alone could not manage establishing a new religion. So, he needed a number of dedicated followers, and that formed the Sangha. At joining, a novice had to accept the authority of the Sangha itself, and that we mentioned as Sangham Sharanam Gacchami, and it remains even today, long after Buddha's Mahaparinirvaan. The Sangha was managed by his top disciples. The face of Buddhism among the masses was the bhikkhu, or the original word bhikshu. He was the first contact. So, he had to be a perfect role model, second only to Buddha himself. Only then would he be capable of preaching and subsequent conversion of the masses. So, some full time dedicated monks and many part time novices were included. They were all bound by a strict moral and ethical code. Naturally, accepting and following the Pancha Mahavrata was mandatory for all. There were many other rules also, and these are all listed in the Vinay Pitak, the first of the three Pitakas. This includes both the personal and collective rules and laws that were to be followed by all. For a novice to join, the term used was, one of the terms used was pravajya, when he would move from being a householder into a new role, and for this he had to accept 10 commandments instead of just the 5 that we mentioned long back. At this diksha, the first requirement was mundan, that is shaving off of all hair. We see this in so many Japanese and Chinese martial art films at the end of the film. Then they are supposed to take over a yellow robe. This is known as the chivar. Then a broom and a fly whisk, and of course a begging bowl for the alms that are to be accepted. Cleaning and maintaining all these was a personal responsibility of every individual. Personal hygiene was said to be a prime aspect. Anand once scolded somebody for trying to go and meet Buddha without having a bath. So, it was a strict rule. There were in addition to the first 5 that we had talked of, he had to accept whatever was given. There could be no selectivity in the alms that were handed over. He was to take no food at night. He was to use no bed, no flowers, no incense. That is why in many of these Buddhist caves there are stone beds or platforms that were designed to keep them safe from the crawling creatures that were around. Meditation and self tracking was expected to be very essential, and whenever he went to take gifts or alms, he was to accept nothing that was precious. That was the rule. There are 227 rules for the daily routine that are mentioned in the Vinay Pitak. He was to survive, as I said, only on the handouts. and take only what is essential for his own sustenance. There was another major aspect. It is known as uposatha. Every 5-6 days in a month, there would be a collective gathering of all the monks in the Sangha of that particular section, and they would undergo a process of open confession. Realize that this is 600 years earlier than the Christian concept of confession, and that of course was one to one between the individual and the priest. Here it is supposed to be open, and the discussions started off with the confessions of the chief abbot or the chief monk. So, it was from the top to bottom, and usually whatever was the error committed by a person was mentioned. Usually forgiveness was given, or some minor penance was requested to be carried out, and if there was a willful violation, there would be more amount of penance that was expected to be done. The Vinay Pitak also mentions expulsion from the Sangha for what are known as Mahadosha, serious crimes. These include indulgence in sex, stealing, murder, and self-proclaimed claim to supernatural powers and trying to exploit people around you. For this, you were out of the Sangha. And then you could reside at a particular place for only about 3 days maximum at one particular location. And India is a place where there used to be a lot of rains, the monsoons, and so there was a special clause associated with what is known as Varshavas, that is staying in the rains. During rains, travel was impossible. So the monk had to either stay with some family, where he was expected to compensate by serving, providing medical help, advice, sharing his knowledge, and so forth. And then they were all expected to stay collectively in some caves. These were usually built with the help of a royal patronage. These cave dwellings are scattered Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, and so many other areas. They are all spread all around the corners of India. That is where they were supposed to stay. Gradually these places became permanent residents of the Sangha, resulting into some problems that I will come to. There was of course in every Sangha a chief abbot to oversee, teach, solve queries, provide and manage for all the members of the Sangha who were associated with him. Initially ladies were not permitted to join the Sangha, but as I had mentioned last time, due to Anand's, his disciples insistence, there was a permission granted, and Buddha had complained effectively that my religion would have lasted 1,000 years, but now because there are ladies included, there would be, it would probably last only for 500 years. Actually it has survived right up to today, and that is a great thing. Yeah. These bhikkus or bhikshus of the Sangha, the monks, had their own experiences also. These have been actually mentioned in 2 popular books known as the Thera Gatha and the Theri Gatha. These depict all their experiences during travellings, some poetry related to nature around. The ladies have talked about their experiences prior to joining the Sangha and their experiences after joining the Sangha, and so forth. With time and with royal patronage, the Sangha gained power. The chief monks, abbots became advisors to kings. So naturally their political clout increased, they gained reverence, and naturally immunity and security for themselves and the members of the Sangha. So this resulted into a problem. The criminals tending to join the Sangh increased, because then they were free of all problems once they were a part of the Sangh. So, naturally, because of this, the quality of dedicated workers started to deteriorate. Also, with a lot of gifts coming in, the wealth accumulation of the Sangh at different centers started increasing. Some of it was invested in making up and building large number of universities, but that did not stop from their accumulation of wealth, and it had its own problems, which resulted much later into attacks on the Sanghas. Buddha's original ideas were superseded as time passed. The concepts of heaven and hell and gods and demons and ideals, idols, they all started creeping in. There was one more issue. Masses contributed to the Sangha, but the salvation finally becoming in the Arhat or moksha or nirvana was meant for the bhikkus. So the common man had little to gain directly while he was contributing to the maintenance of this Sangha. So naturally, with time the commitment to contributions started decreasing. There was one more major issue. The rules throughout his life of 40 years were extremely strict. It was not easy for a monk to survive, and so immediately after his Mahaparinirvaan, one of his disciples, his name is also registered as Subhadha. He said, "Oh, now we are free. We are free of all these very difficult rules and regulations." And when Mahakashyap, one of his major disciples, heard this, he decided that there was a time to get everybody together, formulate rules and regulations. So he under the patronage of King Ajatashatru, in the Saptaparni Gufa, that is a cave, he got together a number of monks. It is said that there were around 500 of them. This is at Rajgruha, and this was the first major gathering. This was immediately after Gautam Buddha passed away, that is around 483 BC, and the process of this meeting proceedings started with the monks reciting collectively a large number of prayers in musical form. And so these gatherings later on, 3 or 4 of them that took place, and this one also was referred to as the Sangiti. The word Sangiti is associated with musical aspects. So these gatherings were then called as Sangiti. In this first Sangiti, the Sutta Pitak and the Vinay Pitak were formed. The word Pitak is associated with a cask in which all the information was collected. Sutta Pitak is original word, Sanskrit word obviously is Sutra, and Sutra is a term that I had explained in detail long back when we were talking of some other issues. This Sutta Pitak is the collection of all the sayings and utterances of Gautam Buddha that were remembered but were not written down. And the second one, the Vinay Pitak, is the one in which all the rules, as I said, were compiled, and these were then passed on with time to the next generations. Another 100 years passed by, and in Vaishali, under the patronage of King Kalashok, and under the heading being headed by the priest Shabdakami, the second Sangiti was held, and it is here that people started realizing that their opinions did not match with each other, and the system and the Sangha began to split. There were some orthodox ones, they were known as the Sthaviravadin, and the bigger group which wanted lax rules to be with more progressive ideas formed a major group, and these were known as the Mahasanghic, and these two groups were formed even then. But these were not the only ones. Actually, Mahayaan, the traveler from China who had landed up, talks of around 96 different subsects that were present in Buddhism. Ashok, prior to the third Sangiti at his place, King Ashok, consolidated most of these 96 subsects and got them together with the help of his guru and held the third Sangiti. This was at Patliputra. Mogaliputta Tissa was the chief of this, and the Abhidhamma Pitak, the third Pitak, was compiled here. Much later, around 72 AD, at in Kashmir, at a place called Kundalwan, under the patronage of King Kanishka, the fourth Sangiti took place, and here the split between the two groups was finalized. They were headed by two monks, Vasumitra and Ashwaghosh, and by then even the foreign spread of Buddhism had begun, and this resulted into the two groups being known on the basis of their approach to what Buddhism itself was. They were named as the Hinayaan and the Mahayaan. There was actually one more which is known as the Vajrayaan. I will talk of that a little later. Yan basically means a vehicle, and so these were the vehicles that were to be used by the people to reach the final goal, which is the salvation. So, the route of your destination was determined whether you followed what was known as the Hinayaan, which is also the Sthaviravadi or the Theravadin group, and the Mahasanghic or the Mahayaan group. Different viewpoints as to why the split took place is mentioned in one of the later texts known as the Kathavastu. Whether Buddha is God or not was one of the major issues. The concept of the existence of the soul was the second issue, and the final goal of what Buddhism is to lead to as either an arhata, the one who has achieved everything, or a new concept that was introduced known as the bodhisattva. The arhata concept was associated with the Hinayaan, and the bodhisattva was associated with the Mahayanis. This was basically because of difference in the ideologies that they had, and so finally the unity of the Sangha was lost to some extent. But you must realize that both the Hinayanis and the Mahayanis all have the same Tripitakas, the same Panchashil, the same Dashashil, but the Dashashil, meaning the 10 rules, were quite lax in case of the Mahayana. The Arya Satyas were the same, the Three Ratnas were the same, the pilgrimage sites were the same, the holy symbols were all the same, but the difference was in the approach of what was felt. The first thing that you must realize is when Buddha passed away, in his last sermon and last advice to his disciples, he had mentioned Atma Deepo Bhava, become self-enlightened, find out your own individual path, and finally reach nirvana. What obviously he meant was that after 40 years I am not going to be around, so you have to fight and struggle and achieve whatever you want to on your own. But then there were some extremely dedicated ones who felt that this is exactly what Buddha has said, so each of us must struggle on his own and finally reach the destination. This was the orthodox group. the Theravadin, or the ones who are known as the Hinayaanis. This is the group that its disciples are at two major areas. Ceylon is one of the, that is Sri Lanka, is the first area where in fact Ashok had sent his children to propagate the religion, and later on in Brahmadesh, where this Hinayaan extended to a large extent. These people, this group of people or the Sangh associated with Hinayaan does not believe in idol worship, because that is what Buddha had said, no idols. So, no idol worship. All their texts are in Pali. Their center is in Kosambi, a part of closer to Bihar and that area. They did not accept the concept of Bodhisattva. This is a completely different concept that I would explain. And according to Hinayaanis, then everybody is said to be Pachit Buddha. That means he is supposed to achieve the state. The original Pali word is Pachit Buddha, but the original Sanskrit word is Pratyek Buddha. That means every individual must try and achieve the state of being a Buddha. The Mahayana or the Mahasanghic or the progressive group was the one which believed in lax rules. They could be all that strict for the monks. Many of the Hindu concepts were also gradually creeping in into Buddhism. They started using Sanskrit as their major language for retaining their texts and information. According to them, many of the Hindu concepts of heaven, gods, Buddha itself as God, use of idols not only of Gautam Buddha but also the Bodhisattvas, the concept of having multiple Buddhas, and that a new Buddha in future is supposed to come, which is who is known to be the Maitreya. All these ideas started creeping in, and they were accepted by the masses, because still a majority of the masses was associated with Hinduism, and so they needed to have a common front for all of them. There was one more major aspect. The Mahayanis believed that trying to achieve Buddhism on your own is a selfish attitude. So, do not be selfish, strive for the development collectively, for the development of all of them, and for this a new concept was introduced, which is known as the Bodhisattva. Some of the words associated with Bodhisattva that you must have heard are Avalokiteshwar or Padmapani or Amitabh and so forth. These are all said to be Bodhisattvas. Now, what is a Bodhisattva? A person who performs very good deeds and is practically on the stage of being Buddha and has reached the Swarga, that is heaven, but does not want to reside there, because he is keen on trying to develop the common man, to bring about his progress. So, he comes back to earth, takes birth in different forms and tries to help people achieve their nirvana. These are the ones who are known as Bodhisattvas. There is one more concept that was introduced simultaneously. It was believed that not only the Bodhisattvas but Buddha himself had taken many different life forms earlier to the one that we have talked of as Gautam Buddha, and in all these life forms he started developing very good qualities, ideal qualities within a human being, and these are all referred to as paramitas, and in every life he progressed till he finally reached the stage that we have talked of nirvana. The various Bodhisattvas also did the same thing, and so there were many tales in which what these good qualities are explained, and that is a very popular part of Buddhist texts. It is known as the Jatak Katha. Jatak, a word that I had explained long back, which means being born again. And so these are all stories associated with them, which are which are meant to guide people. They are not a part of the Tripitakas, but they are said to guide people into understanding the core ideas of Buddhism to a large extent. These many of these were said to be avatars. Even Buddha is said to have had 3 avatars previously. Then concepts of having special prayers for Buddha and his idols also started off. There were rituals that were also carried out, and this ritualism crept into the third part of the Sangha, which I am going to come to a little later. The concept of Bodhisattva is like trying to take everybody along with you to the topmost place, and so this is something that is important for the progress of all individuals too. As I said, previous avatars, there is a reference to Ekuchanda, Kanak Muni and Kashyap as the 3 avatars of Buddha prior in various eons prior to the present one, and in the next one, the one that is going to come forward is to be the Maitreya and so forth. So, all these ideas which are also part and parcel of the Vedic concepts and the Puranic concepts of Hinduism, which is a common base for many others also, was gradually creeping into Buddhism. That is when later on, as you realize that Buddha himself has been treated as the 10th avatar of Vishnu. I will come to that sometime later. Foreign spread, as I said, had already started, and Hinayaan spread into Sri Lanka and Brahmadesh, but the others, that is in China, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Japan, Cambodia, Korea, all these are places where Buddhism reached much later, and that is the time after about 3rd, 4th, 5th century AD, and by then the strongest group was the Mahayaan. So, the Mahayaan concepts dominated in the foreign areas where Buddhism spread, and this was more because of the Mahayani part of the Sangha, which propagated the religion outside India. Now, the third aspect. In the northeast, that is Bengal, there is a lot of influence. There was a lot of influence on Hinduism in what are on certain sects, the Shakta and the Shaiva, Kali and Shiva. These are the two. They are all associated with tantric, that is certain procedural aspects of mysticism. Many a times the word esoteric is used, but it does not really fully communicate the concept of what tantric is. This also naturally had an influence on Buddhism, and this resulted into certain rituals, certain secret rituals more, into certain mantras and mandala, that is certain drawings, then certain incantations and so forth, and this is all a collective influence of the Shakta and the Shaivas on Buddhism. This resulted into a group that became very strong in that particular area and is known as the followers of Vajrayaan. Vajra is the weapon of Indra, and it is supposed to be one of the hardest materials that was known that time. And so, this very hard dedicated group of people called their vehicle to Nirvana as Vajrayaan. It spread into all the Himalayan region, basically Nepal, Tibet, Mongolia, and the concepts of many of the Bodhisattvas was very dominant here. Not only that, but something different also was added. Goddesses like Tara, Manjushri were also added. Padmasambhav, Vajrapani, Avalokiteshwar, Amitabh, all these are all part and parcel of the ones as gods that were prayed and resorted to for many of the activities. So, idol worship became a very dominant issue here. It was believed that some of these could be used to ward off evil influences and to protect individuals from bad influences. And this was because in the Himalayas and other regions, the cultural development had not taken place to the extent that took place in India. So, these were all people who were still in the shamanic age. Many a times this part of Buddhism, the Vajrayaan, is talked of popularly as Tibetan Buddhism. Tibet, Ladakh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, Arunachal Pradesh, all these, Inner Mongolia, all these are the areas where this Tibetan Buddhism has spread. And this Tibetan Buddhism is a part of the Vajrayaan. It is just a different nomenclature, that is all. Actually, it has ideas that are common from Mahayana and Vajrayaan both together, and this along with the tantric concepts, the ritualistic, secretive ritualistic aspects. Songstang Gampo, known as Rinpoche, is the one who is supposed to have dominantly explained this. This is said to be one of the fastest methods of achieving nirvana. That is what the Vajrayanis claim. Actually, around 7th century AD, there was a Tibetan king who had a Nepalese and a Chinese wife, and both these queens were Buddhists. So, the king was quite keen on accepting Buddhism, and so he joined Buddhism, but it was not meant for the common masses. But the idea of Buddhism had already started off there, it was triggered on, and a few generations after him, the king at that time invited a tantric known as Padmasambhav to come all the way from India and preach this Buddhism religion in these Tibetan areas. What he did was, he not only took the ideas from Buddhism, but merged them with the local shaman concepts to small extent, and this resulted into the form of Buddhism that is prevalent there. The name given to him was Rinpoche, and this led to what we today talk of as the lamas and their concepts. By around 14th century, Kublai Khan had conquered Tibet, and he is the one who encouraged Buddhism to a large extent. There was one more issue. There was a tantric known as Atish around 1000 AD, who was from Bengal, and he reached the Tibetan area and formed what is known as the Kadam school of Buddhism in Tibet. A part of this group is referred to as the yellow hats, and they are the ones who are led by the Dalai Lama. So, that Buddhism part is a slightly separate branch deviant from the original Sangha, resulting into the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama means the sea, a guru who is as vast as the sea, whose knowledge is as big as the sea. So, their head is Dalai Lama. You are aware of the Tibetan problem when China took it over, and they all shifted to India, and Dalai Lama is in India itself. the whole group is in India, and this then is one more branch of Buddhism. So, Buddhism, as you can see, has spread because of the Sangha. The Sangha is the strongest part, and the strength of the Sangha has kept Buddhism alive for all these years. Initially, there were no females, but then Manjushri, Tara and many other goddesses were added on. If you go to Nepal, you will see idols of the female deities also. Many of the tantric deities from Hinduism are also accepted in Buddhism, basically Vajrayaan, but I won't go into details of those at this stage. Basically then the three branches, the Mahayana, which is the biggest one, the Hinayaan, the earliest one, and the slightly deviant Vajrayaan are the major three surviving groups of Buddhism in the world. Different countries follow these, and each of them is associated with their own concepts and ideologies. The Tripitakas are the original texts, and they have been translated, and there are many other texts also. This then is the strength of the Sangha. If you have liked whatever I have said, please like and subscribe to this channel. Tell your friends about it. Learn a little more about Buddhism, because that's the fourth largest religion in the world today. And so some of the ideas, some of the concepts are good for us to use at all stages. I am going to move into newer areas next time, and we will come back to the Pauranic Dharma next time onwards. Till we meet again, Namaskar.